أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So I'm looking around and I see, mashallah, on the sister side, ooh, the room is full, we're still going strong. On the brother's side, you're struggling a little. You're struggling. And I see that I think the 3 prayer rugs were actually won by the sisters, if I saw that correctly. Yes. But subhanallah, you know, the topic that I was asked to speak about, I think it's an important topic, especially as we sit in a room like this. And as we see, subhanAllah, prior to me coming up here and speaking, we got to see Sister Meha, who, mashallah, in that sensitive way, in that way of bringing emotion to the front, in that way of connecting her words with her heart, with making us all feel something as she spoke. She truly exemplified how Allah Azza wa Jal creates us in perfect balance. Because as we listen to the brothers speaking, Sheikh Sohaib, Dr. Sharif, and several of the other speakers, we see a different style of speaking, we see a different way of connecting. And this is by design, because Allah Azza wa Jal, in His perfection, has created us perfectly, has created us as males and females. And in the Quran, we are reminded that He has created us as partners, male and female. And yet today, we ask questions that we never would have asked a few decades ago. We ask questions like, what is a woman? We ask questions like, what is a man? Questions that a few decades ago we would have thought was ridiculous. Questions that today we have an entire documentary about trying to answer the question, what is a woman? And in the end of this documentary, it is inconclusive. There are thousands of people that are asked, what is a woman? And there are so many different answers that are given. And yet these are the wrong questions that we are asking. These are not the questions that Allah Azza wa Jal has guided us towards seeking the answers to. The better question that we need to be asking is why? Why have we created such divisions in our community, where we are constantly highlighting, competing, going against one another, male and female? Why have we created such an emphasis in the community, in our society, on our biological gender and our sociological understanding of that gender? Why have we created so much competition between the two? And it's not just the question of what is a woman or what is a man. It's a question that goes much deeper than that. What is my role as a Muslim woman? What is my role as a Muslim man? What does Allah Azza wa Jal guide me towards? What does Allah Azza wa Jal decree for me in my role as a Muslim man, as a Muslim woman? Recently, just within the past few weeks or so, we've seen an uproar. Literally, posts and memes and people writing articles at length. About what? About why Barbie, the actress Margot Robbie, was snubbed at the Oscars, and why Ryan Gosling was Knuff and she was not. People have actually used their breath, wasted space, touting these ideals of feminists. And I put this in quotes because feminism in our deen, in an Islamic perspective, means something very different than how feminism has been rerouted and retermed today in society here in the US and in the West. But we see this space being taken up, conversations about injustice relating to women in the workplace, women as leaders, women as bosses, and rightly so. These are positions and places in which women struggle and women historically have struggled. But we see those same individuals who are speaking out against these injustices of women who are perfectly coiffed and dressed in pink, silent about women who wear the keffiyya, women who currently in the past few months in Gaza are experiencing a 300% increase in miscarriages. If you have ever lost a child, If you have ever held in your arms a child of your womb and felt the pain that a mother feels, then this is what we would be fighting for as women and men. This is what would be standing up for. Not who was snubbed at the Oscars, not whether or not society recognizes a woman's salary, whether it's 150 or 200,000 or 300,000. We would be standing up for every mother who has lost a child in her womb because of a genocide. We would be standing up for every mother who has seen her child killed before her eyes because of a genocide. We would be standing up for every young girl who is raped on her way to school rather than seeking an education and being protected by her society. This is the injustice that we are meant to stand up for. This is what it means to find gender justice. To recognize that the way that Allah Azza wa Jal has created us is perfect. Perfect in our form, perfect in balance, perfect in being able to complement one another rather than to consistently compete with one another. Because Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran reminds us in Surah Al-Ahzab, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات. And Allah Azza wa Jal continues to speak of the Muslim men and the Muslim women, to speak of the believing men and the believing women, to speak of the men who do good and the women who do good. And in the end, Allah Azza wa Jal reminds us at the end of that verse, أَعَدَّ اللَّهُ لَهُمَا, that Allah Azza wa Jal promises to them, the men and the women, promises to them forgiveness, maghfirah, promises to them a great reward. Because it does not matter if you were born into the body of a male or you were born into the body of a female. It does not matter biologically how Allah has created you, because it is in His divine decree that He has created you as al-dhakar or al-untha. And yes, our Quran specifies the binary of the gender, that He, in His perfect way of creating human beings, creates us as male or female. And it is in that creation, in recognizing the perfect mold in which we have descended onto this earth, that we need to be able to recognize who we are. And the question we should be asking is not what we are, but who defines us. Where do we get our definitions from? Because if we turn to society to understand what it means to be a modern man, what it means to be a modern woman, if we turn away from the Quran, if we turn away from our deen, then surely we will be lost. Because the definition does not lie in the consumerist push to eliminate the concept of gender, in the consumerist push to break down the faith ideology of building a family unit and to push towards a secular view that breaks down the essence of what it means to be a male and a female, to build a family that is structured in a way that Allah Azza wa Jal has guided us towards, to walk in the footsteps of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in understanding what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Now, I remember, sitting in the audience, and yes, I did see the Barbie movie. I won't ask how many of you saw it, but I took my daughters and my sister and we went to see this movie. And there was a moment in the movie in which there was a speech that was given by one of the actresses in the movie. And in her speech, as she spoke about how hard it is to be a woman, looking around the audience, there were cheers and there were claps, even more than there was for Imam Suhaib a few minutes ago. And there were tears and there was loud feelings of yes, yes. And I want us together to listen to what this actress said, but not to listen from a Western lens that defines us through a consumerist, materialistic, secular point of view, but I want us to listen to it through the Quranic lens, to understand the guidance that Allah has given us to answer the questions that are asked. And in this movie, this woman stands and she says, "It is literally impossible to be a woman. You are so beautiful and so smart. And it kills me that you don't think you're good enough. Like we have to always be extraordinary, but somehow we're always doing it wrong. You have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can never say that you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but you can't talk about your kids all the time. You have to be a career woman, but you also have to be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane, but if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood. But you also always have to stand out and you always have to be grateful, but you never can forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but also be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard. It's too contradictory and nobody gives you a medal. Nobody says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm just so tired of watching myself and every single other woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us. And if all of that is also true for a doll just representing women, then I don't even know. But I know. I know and you know. And we as Muslims know. We know that we are not responsible for the downfall of another person. We are not responsible for the actions of another person, regardless of our gender. We know that Allah has created us to seek His pleasure, not to seek the pleasure of anyone else. We know that it doesn't matter if the entire world does not like you, if you know that Allah is pleased with you. We know that our goal in this dunya is to worship Allah. And we do not need Andrew Tate and the red pills, and we do not need Barbie and Kanaf, and we do not need definitions that are created by society that is intended to divide us, that is intended to fill our hearts with hate, to fill our hearts with misogyny, with misandry, to fill our hearts with a superiority complex, feeling that one gender is better than the other. When we are all human, when we are all created by a creator who creates us in perfection. And this is what we need to know. And this is what we need to act upon. A few years back in 1963, there was a book that was published and it was considered just a groundbreaking work. A book by an author named Betty Friedan. And the book was called The Feminine Mystique. And in this book, Betty asked a question. And it was a question that bears a great deal more weight than the question of what is a woman. The question was, who defines a woman? Who gets to say what it means to be a woman? Who gets to say what it means to be a man? And at the end of her book, upon trying to write out the elements of what it means to be a feminist, she came to a faulty conclusion. And in her conclusion, she posits that for women to break free, and we've talked a great deal about freedom today and the misconceptions of what it means to be free, but in her book, she identifies that for women to break free, they must operate like men. They must emulate men. They must become the men they want to marry, as Gloria Steinem said years later. But this is not freedom. This is a false imprisonment, another form of societal control that is placed upon us to create those divides and keep us far apart from acting as one body, as one ummah, male and female. Years later, we would hear echoes of the same question in another book. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook at that time, wrote a book called Lean In. And she wrote this book in response to a controversy that swirled around her. When she spoke at the Barnard, and we all know Barnard, the sister school nearby, she spoke at the Barnard commencement. And the women who were graduating were waiting to hear pearls of wisdom from this woman's mouth, this woman who they felt had succeeded professionally, who had reached this position of COO at Facebook. And in her speech, she spoke to these women and she said, do not think that the most important decision you're going to make in your life is the job that you land. Do not think that the most important decision you're going to make in your life is the next internship or the graduate school you get into. The most important decision you will make in your life is the partner you choose. And when Sheryl Sandberg said this, she was booed off the stage. She had things thrown at her for speaking these words. And so she wrote this book, Lean In. And in this book, she asked that question, a question that's been asked before and before and before. Who defines what it means to be a woman? Who defines women? And subhanAllah, in reading Betty Friedan's book, in reading Sheryl Sandberg's book, in reading the work of Gloria Steinem, in reading all of these works, that same question, they do not have an answer for it, and yet we do, alhamdulillah. And yet we do, because our deen guides us towards an answer to who defines us. We answer to a higher power. And when we talk about empowerment, we are speaking of the empowerment of Allah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power nor might except by Allah. And this is the power that we seek, that we turn to. This is what fuels us. This is what drives us. And this is what we must hold on to in the face of genocide, in the face of injustice, true injustice that is decimating our societies. This is what you, each and every one of you here, the youth of today, who will be the leaders of tomorrow, inshallah, who are currently today, I see you on the front line being the leaders today. It is you who get to change the tide. It is you who get to answer that question, not just for women, but for men as well. To recognize where our definitions come from. To decide where you will anchor the meaning of your life. Because if we anchor the meaning of our lives to societal definitions, they are always changing. They are always changing. Because how we see what it means to be a woman today is very different than how society may have defined it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Don't anchor your definition of self to any human-centric definition, because that will always fail. Anchor the definition of you to the guidance that Allah has given us. Walk in the footsteps of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Learn what it means to be a man by following the footsteps of the beloved messenger of Allah. Learn what it means to be a woman by following in the footsteps of Nusayba, the warrior who shielded the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in battle. Walk in the footsteps of the female companions of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we don't speak about enough. Know who Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah was. A woman who was a mother, a woman who was a wife, a woman who was a healer, who would practice medicine upon the companions, a woman who was assigned to a market controller, a businesswoman, a woman who was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Know your Islamic heritage. Gain the definitions of who you are from the definitions that Allah has guided us towards. And stand up for injustice. Stand up for injustice wherever it may be. And know what freedom truly looks like. Because we're not going to find it in the books of Betty Friedan. We're not going to find it in the words of Sheryl Sandberg. We are going to find it in the Quran and the Sunnah. Jazakum Allahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.